Thank you for watching our screening of Coming Clean. And now we'd like to engage in a question and answer with the Pettersen family, as well as with Director Ondi Timoner. Ondi, I'd like to start with you and ask why this movie and why now? There are so many topics affecting our society. How, from amongst them, as a filmmaker, did you decide now was the good time to make this movie?
Well, we actually started a few years ago, and when I was approached originally by the Parker Foundation. And once in a while, I do films where people come to me and ask me, would I do a film on a certain topic? And I consider those very carefully when they're not generated by, my own inspiration. In this case, I felt like, and usually I take them on when I have a lot to learn myself. And I didn't know much about this, the deadliest drug epidemic in our history. Um, and I felt like I had a lot to learn in that area. But what I did before saying yes was really look at all the films that were out there about addiction, and specifically about opioid addiction and heroin addiction. And what I noticed was that there was just no film that I could find that was a resource where people could really understand what causes the addiction, why it's something that traverses every economic, geographic, social, ethnic barrier in our society, every sector. There's no one who's not touched by this, and why that is, and then also how to get out of it, how we might get out of it on a political level, what we need on a federal level, but also personally. How do you recover from something this devastating and apparently seemingly insurmountable? So that was what was appealing to me, was that this foundation was interested in making a film that was focused on hope and recovery. And really, I felt like if I could bring beauty and grace to the subject with animation, with beautiful cinematography using 16 millimeter and 8 millimeter film, that we would have something that was approachable, that people could watch and enjoy for 90 minutes. That was the other thing about the films that were out there. They were all so dark. They were heroin needles in everybody's arms, and people just down and out on drugs. And we've all seen those images so many times, even just on the nightly news. To follow something and really to open our hearts and minds, we needed to use art. And that's what we tried to do with this film. And that was before I met Brittany and her mom or any of the other amazing people in this film. But just knowing that that was going to be the agenda I was in.
So I have to imagine you set out to tell a story, and when you meet the players and when you jump into the scenario, did that story change along the way? Did it evolve from what you saw in the beginning to what we now see on the screen?
Yeah, absolutely. That's another thing I love about making documentaries. I make both kinds of films, and the difference is with a doc, you just have no idea where it's going to go, and it's really a wonderful journey to take if you're open minded to just kind of go and follow what is opening, and just like it, a lot of serendipity happens. And in the case of Brittany's story, for example, my mom handed me that article I mentioned in the introduction about Brittany and Stacy. And then what I found was so different. I didn't know that I didn't know the details of the story really, or that Brittany had started this opioid subcommittee that was absolutely crucial in passing, vanguard legislation, which now leads the country in terms of a standard for how to treat opioid addiction. I had no idea that I would land right in the middle of that, and that subcommittee and the work there and the doctors who were her chief, advisors would become the people who did the voiceover about addiction in the film. But it just kind of unfolded that way. And so that was beautiful. But I had no, I knew I needed to start with treatment centers and otherwise, getting into treatment centers. And through a treatment center in Utah, I met Destiny Garcia, and she happened to work for Mayor McAdams at the time. And that's how that story happened, and then the mayor becomes congressman while we're making the film. And Representative Pettersen becomes State Senator Brittany Pettersen. So these kinds of things just started to unfold, where suddenly it's like, oh, wait, it's all of these political leaders that are being touched personally by people who are coming out of addiction or who are impossibly addicted, as in the case of Stacy, who struggled for 30 years. This is a story. This is a way to look at how we all need to kind of be touched directly, how we all need to figure out, and that to me was very meaningful, because then that way, through their stories, I could kind of explore everything else. Admiral Winnefeld, another example, leader, second in command in the military under Obama and Bush, lost his son. Where did he lose his son? Denver. 4 days into his stint at Denver University as a freshman. And once again, coming back to the same doctor who could speak about it, the same doctor who saved Stacy's life, who also did the voiceover. Crazy serendipity like that happened with this film. And that's what happens when a film is meant to. I've noticed from Dig and We Live in Public and a bunch of my films, when a film is meant to happen, it's bigger than we are. And it's about just following the muse and then saying, okay, here's what we have now. Let's make it understandable for everybody else. So.
Yeah. Well, Senator Pettersen and Stacy, let's bring you into the conversation. Can you ever have imagined that your story would have been told on this major platform? And tell me about the process for you, even starting with an article that appears across the country and turns into not only political legislation, but now a documentary about the opiate crisis. So tell us about your journey through this whole process.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Mom, I'll go.
Yeah.
First. So, I definitely never thought that our story would be covered anywhere. I wasn't comfortable talking about it. It was something that was too painful. And it was, I remember being in a committee talking about the overprescription issue in Colorado. It was on a public health committee hearing. And I talked about, they had, highlighted how prescriptions have actually been reduced and they're doing their job. And I said, well, actually overdose deaths are going up. Isn't that right? And it's because people are being cut off of their prescriptions without access to treatment and going to heroin. And so in this public hearing, I was asking somebody about this, and they confirmed all of that. And I said, I know personally because I have a family member who's going through the same thing. And it was actually Robert Sanchez who reached out to me and inquired about my story first with 5280 magazine to talk about my mom. And it was really hard. And I think that it's really common to feel a lot of shame growing up with addiction in your family, and it's kids feel like it's their fault. They're not loved. It's common just to feel really embarrassed of where you come from, and I carried that with me into my adult life, even though I know it was illogical. And so I think that for me to actually talk about it was the first step in me being able to tell people why this issue mattered and what we needed to do to fix it. And it got to a point where things were just so bad with what I saw with my mom that I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to actually talk about what I was seeing and work to address it, no matter how difficult it was. And I know it hasn't been, I think you've done a really good job about opening up, but do you want to talk about what it's been like for you telling your story and having something so personal?
In doing this, I had to overcome the embarrassment just so I could tell my story and other addicts could hear my story. I mean, many years of addiction, and with my age, it's like people never would have guessed that I became a heroin addict. And so with this story, I've just overcome the embarrassment, and by doing that, I hope that other people are listening and won't be so afraid, and that there is treatment.
Stacy, if you could go back and if you could tell something to the family members that are supporting people going through the struggle of addiction, what would you tell those family members? What would you tell the people who are trying to help someone who is addicted and struggling with that?
I guess probably the most important thing is to educate yourself without judgment. I think the hardest part of being out there and people knowing is the fear of being judged. And I think that's a huge thing that addicts need to overcome, is that fear of judgment.
And that you, when, like you said, when family members are finally understand that it's a disease and are there to support and help you, it's much different than blaming you, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it took a lot for Brittany to navigate the system to get help for me after many, many overdoses and almost death. She went through the court system and made sure that I got the help I needed. And like I said, and to overcome the stigma and be able to talk about it without being embarrassed.
Senator Pettersen, there are major advantages to being in an elected position and actually being able to take action with regard to this opiate crisis. However, it also puts you in the spotlight. And the very poignant part of the movie where you're working on legislation at the same time you're hearing terrible news about your mother's struggle. Talk us through that and talk through what that process is, personally and professionally, being put on the spotlight, but also having the opportunity to do something about it.
James, you ask such great questions and they're emotional. But yeah, when I was in a unique position, watching my mom just be turned in and out of the ICU, her hospital bills costing hundreds of thousands of dollars, and begging for help, and me begging for help, and having nowhere to send her, and truly seeing how broken the system is when she finally was asking for the help I've been waiting my entire life to hear, the words that I've been waiting my entire life to hear. And then we had nowhere to send her. And so that's when I just, as a policymaker, I saw how we were burning money with actually spending way more money than if we were to actually just help the people and get them the treatment that they need so they could live fulfilling lives. And I was also just fighting every day to try to save my mom at the same time where I was trying to close those policy gaps. And I remember being interviewed by a news station after one of our biggest bills was passed. And I didn't think my mom was going to be alive to actually see it, to benefit from it. And I couldn't, it's hard because it's such a difficult subject. And especially when you don't have money to help support your family members in getting them the care that they need. And so it's a very emotional process. I jokingly say it's forced counseling because it's like this thing that I just kind of held deep inside that I didn't want to talk about, or the issues I didn't want to work on. It was out there. It was also healing to talk about it, to meet other people who are going through it, people in the field who do this work every day, who needed an advocate more than, in this moment where I was able to step in and fill this enormous void in our system, to be a voice for people like my mom who are left behind every step of the way, and to actually be able to navigate what it looks like to fix that at a policy level. So I felt really lucky to be in that spot, even though it was difficult emotionally to navigate and talk about.
Yeah. And Ondi, I've got to tell you that having the advantage of watching this film in advance was pretty important, because knowing some of the players like the Pettersen family was difficult for me. A really, really tough topic, I think, shown in a very poignant way. this topic has come to the forefront, but it's only come to the forefront now. Many say because it has hit all sectors of society, all socioeconomic levels. How does that kind of sit with you compared to, and someone during the film made the connection with people dying in the streets with the crack cocaine epidemic of the 80s, which didn't have the same kind of emphasis. So how did that sit with you as a filmmaker, kind of the juxtaposition of the stories that haven't been told, but being able to tell this one?
It's funny you mentioned that line. I fought some people on the team to make sure that line stayed in. I thought it was really, really important to point out that we really only started to care about it when it became a white issue, and that's what it seemed like to me. And realizing, oh wait, it's white suburban housewives that are suffering from this. We're losing them. Uh-oh. And we woke up to it. And that's not, that's a rash generalization, but generally speaking, that seems to be the case with this epidemic. And, I think in the light of Black Lives Matter this summer and George Floyd and all that we've had our eyes open to during this pandemic, with essential workers being, largely minorities, and minorities being largely more affected by this pandemic than anyone else. It's a real problem that it takes that for us to pay attention to things. That said, whatever it takes right now to pay attention to this and to break down the stigma around it, the idea that, and it's Stacy who says it in the film, that, it's not a choice. That Brittany says, as a girl, I thought my mom's making a choice. And, Stacy explains the pain, the physical pain that one goes through, where you feel like you're dying, you'd rather be dead. To have to cross that chasm when we only have 3 days of coverage for people, and then they're put out on the street again, of course they're going to go and use again. Of course they're going to try to find that. So it's a matter of not having the support. And the reason we don't have the support is because everyone is judging people who are addicted as having made a choice. And that's what's really important to understand, is that there's a lot of untreated mental health issues in this country. We've never been good at it. It's not something that insurance companies even cover most of the time. And yet we have greater mental health problems on a wider scale than anywhere in the world, because of how driven our culture is, I think, because of how distracted we are, the pressure that we have. And it's really, there's a lot of people walking around with depression. There's a lot of people walking around with anxiety, and they're going untreated. And so when they go in for any kind of operation, really, I mean, you literally have to specifically say, I don't want an opioid. And even then, you often will be prescribed an opioid, and that's getting a little bit better now, but that's been the case. I've noticed it myself personally, and many people have said that to me. So, you go in for that, you get a prescription, and it's suddenly pain. See, pain in our brain is actually, it turns out, and I've actually learned this on the new film I'm making, and I wished I had included it in Coming Clean, but pain is pain, no matter whether it's physical pain or emotional pain. The impact on your brain is the same. It comes through as pain. And so your body reads it as pain. So an opioid comes along and blocks that pain receptor, so you don't feel the pain in Stacy's case, in her back for falling on a skateboard. But also all of Stacy's problems from having been abused and, raped, and all this horrific abuse that she grew up with and she had been pushing down her whole life, is also getting treated by that opioid. And she's not feeling as burdened anymore. Well, that's pretty attractive. And it's not something that, again, she chooses or even is consciously aware of. But there's more draw to the pill than just the pain of the back. And I think that's something that we don't understand in this country. And if we did understand it, then we would understand why this is the deadliest drug epidemic in our history. And we should say that COVID has brought about, and Brittany is the first person to give me the stats on this, but I think in Colorado, it's a 63% increase in opioid overdose deaths. And 232% increase in fentanyl related overdose deaths. So it is spiraling out of control right now because those same people aren't getting, they're the last people to get help. In fact, Brittany's budgets have been proposed to be cut. So it's going in the opposite direction because everything is COVID, 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 which is understandable on some level, but that's why we want the film to be seen as soon as possible by as many people as possible. So.
And staying on that, Ondi, what do you want the effect of the film to be? This is awareness. This is education. Is this fodder for legislation change? What is the best possible outcome from your perspective?
Well, I was pretty ambitious in making the film, and I think that's why it might feel overwhelming. I don't know if you felt overwhelmed. You said you felt emotional watching it, but you come from a personal perspective on it, James. I don't know whether the audiences feel that way. I know that many people say they're still crying a day or two afterwards, but it's also meant to be very hard hitting, one-stop shopping in terms of what you need to know about not just what this drug does to your body, but also what it's done to how it's spread, like the doctors taking bribes, basically pharmaceutical companies knowing our information. That's a revelatory information that's in the film about what used to be IMS, now IQVIA, selling our prescription information. How this great crime against Americans has been perpetrated is also part of the film, as well as Mike Moore, one of the lead prosecutors in the opioid lawsuits, who also is the same guy who took down, big tobacco and BP oil, quite a legend in his own right, does a great job of narrating where to from here. And I think Admiral Winnefeld weighs in a great way too, and Brittany and McAdams. So you have these policy leaders who are on the front lines saying, here's what we need. So I hope that all the governors will see it. I hope that all the opioid subcommittees around America will see it. But we're also going to target treatment centers. We're going to work with an organization called Shatterproof and a couple of other organizations who have tracked treatment centers to take the film to treatment centers and do virtual screenings. We know that Odyssey House all watched it on its premiere, and it was apparently very meaningful. I can imagine that if you're in treatment and you're watching this film, you have more fuel to stay sober than ever before, and so the hope is this will save lives. And then obviously we're going for a national release of the film, and if it's on a massive streamer like a Netflix or an Apple or an Amazon, then the families around those people will have a greater understanding and more empathy for the people that they have been struggling with overdose after overdose. They like, why are you still doing this? It's like, okay, well, now I understand and I have compassion and I'm going to work with you in a softer way, which is what we need, so because shame, you can't recover when you have shame, and I have to say, I was approached to make this film. I'm so glad I did make this film. Personally, it's changed my life just in terms of deepening me as a person, not just in relation to addiction, but just opening my eyes to just how fragile and vulnerable we all are, and how much love and compassion we all need, especially at this time, when so many of us are isolated. And so I'm really happy and excited to be bringing this film everywhere and doing everything I can to make it accessible,
Excellent.
Yeah.
And Senator Pettersen, as a legislator, as someone who can affect change, what is the best possible outcome about sharing your family's story, and what should happen with regard to the impact of this film?
Well, I think my mom has said it best when I asked her if you could tell people one thing, what would it be? If there was one message that you could tell people, and she said that there's hope. And having no hope my entire life, going through this for decades, and never actually having the real answers and the real support necessary to help my mom. And then as a legislator, having access to all the top experts in Colorado that helped me navigate the system, that they were able to help me get an involuntary commitment on my mom to ensure that she had treatment paid for and what that looked like. So the barrier was so high, and I had access, and it was still very difficult as a legislator who had all the experts in Colorado to help me navigate this. But I saw that it is possible for people to overcome this, that it is possible in the most hopeless situation. You saw a picture of my mom the last day that she went to the hospital. She overdosed 3 times that day, and she looks like death in that picture. I mean, she was able to be brought back that day, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to save my mom, but when we got her committed and into treatment, I was just trying to buy additional days, thinking my mom will be alive for at least 3 more weeks or 3 more months if I can keep her there. And she was able to actually get the support she needed for the first time, and her brain was able to heal, and she was able to live in a supportive community, and was offered a job, and all these things that changed in her life that made it so she was able to actually overcome it for the first time. And so my hope with being a part of this film is that people leave watching this. Everybody knows somebody, and so I hope that people leave thinking about the individuals in their life who they know, and reaching out with empathy and love and understanding, and trying to help change the system, because this really is actually a policy issue. My mom's story is aligned with every single policy failure along the way. Yes, she had to do the hard work ultimately in treatment to stay sober and to stay in recovery, but she was only able to do that with the right policies in place and support that helped her recover. And so they're working on specific policy solution recommendations, I think, on their website, so that you can kind of get into the weeds at the local and state level. But we can overcome this. It is not hopeless.
Yeah, we're going to make the website really a hub for information and resources and breaking news about the epidemic, and also invite people to schedule their own screenings of the film. So comingcleanmovie.com is a great way to kind of stay in touch with us. And then we're Coming Clean Movie on Instagram and Facebook and everything like that too. But we're going to try to amp up Senator Pettersen's efforts.
Excellent. Yeah. And Stacy, one final word from you. You've laid your whole story out there. And what do you want to see happen? You have policymakers and people making decisions. What should they know about your journey, and what do you want to tell them about you and the struggle?
I guess the one thing that comes to mind is that with the shame and all the labels that are put on us as addicts, is that we still deserve to be loved and loved
and live.
Yeah. And live, that there's hope.
Thanks again for joining us for Denver Film Festival's 43rd year. And thank you to Director Ondi Timoner and the Pettersen family for joining us and the question and answer session for Coming Clean.
It was an absolute pleasure, James. Thank you so much for the great questions. And I really just hope to be able to bring my next film to Denver Film Festival live and in person once we get past this pandemic. I think I was there last time with Cool It in 2010. So it's been quite a while, but you guys do a great festival. So thanks for including us.
Yes, we are so happy to be a part of this. Thank you for watching Coming Clean. And also, I want to thank my mom for being brave and telling her story to change the world.
Yes, thank you, Stacy. Thanks, Brittany.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.